My name is Dean Berg. I'm with Path to a Green Home. I live in Beverly, but as Judith knows, I spend about half of my week at Starbucks in Marblehead, so I feel like Marblehead is my second home, and I'm pleased to be here, and thank you, Judith, for inviting me to speak. So let's dive in. As you can imagine, today we're going to talk about our homes as it relates to sustainability and climate change. I think most of us probably in the room are concerned about climate change to some degree, maybe to varying degrees. Some head nods, yes. We may know what we're supposed to do. We may know what we can do. But if you're like me, especially me a few years ago, I didn't know where to start. I knew all of these things that I was supposed to do, but I really didn't know where to start, and I really didn't know where to spend my time. So I'm going to talk about our homes, because our homes, that's something that we control, right? We directly control our homes, whether we're a homeowner or whether we're a renter. Maybe we don't have as much control as a renter, but you still have some control. And our homes actually account for about 15% of the emissions in the world as it relates to climate change. So 15% to some may not seem like a lot, but if you think about getting a 15% increase in your pay or a 15% return on an investment, I think most of us would be pretty excited about that, right? So 15% is actually pretty significant. It's a pretty significant chunk of that overall emissions and the overall effect of climate change. So when we talk about our home, there are the obvious resources of heating and cooling and electricity, right? But when we talk about the resources in our home, we're going to talk about everything that comes into our home and everything that goes out of our home. So not only are we going to talk about our heating fuel and our electricity, but we're also going to talk about our water. We're going to talk about our food and our food waste. And we're going to talk about our product and product waste and product packaging. So you'll hear me repeat those 5 different resources throughout the presentation. I'm going to use this slide to share some interesting statistics, or at least statistics that I feel are interesting, and some of them were pretty surprising to me. So first of all, we'll start out with water. I don't know if anybody knows how much water they use on a daily basis, but the average U.S. household uses 200 gallons of water a day. In the house and on our lawns, our gardens, our plants, our shrubs, the garden hose to wash the car, 200 gallons. So that's 200 milk jugs, right? That's a lot of water. Indirectly, so this is water that is used for to process the food that we buy, to create the products that we buy, water that is used to create the gasoline, for those of us who have not switched over to an EV yet. Indirectly, we use about 2,000 gallons of water per day, the average American household. That's a lot of water. And I'm standing right in your way. No, it's okay. I'm going to try to move off to the side here. This next statistic blew me away. So when we look at our food production in the world, all of the food that is produced for us humans in the world, 33% of that is wasted. 33% of that never makes it to our table. So it's lost in the fields, it's lost during processing, it's lost in the stores, it's lost during transportation. 11% of that is wasted by us. 11% of that is wasted in our home. Okay? It's either spoils in a refrigerator, it isn't eaten when you have a teenager. Well, I guess a teenager would eat everything. So maybe it's a younger child. Right, yeah. So 11% is wasted. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so we get double taxed for that. Number one, the energy that is used on the front end to create this extra food and process the extra food that we never use is lost energy, not lost energy, it's additional energy, additional emissions, additional effect on climate change, right? And then we get taxed on the back end as well, unless we're composting that. If we're composting that, great. If we're not, it goes into the garbage, goes into the landfill. So let's talk about our landfill. Half of our material in the landfills, 51% of the material in our landfills are it's compostable materials. It's food scraps, lawn clippings, paper products, wood, so things that can be composted. They're in our landfills. You may say, okay, so why does that matter, right? Yeah, so landfills emit a gas called methane gas. When we talk about emissions and greenhouse gases, and when we talk about climate change, we're usually referring to carbon dioxide, CO2, and that is definitely the biggest gas relative to climate change and emissions. But methane gas is another one of those greenhouse gases. It's another one of those gases that impacts climate change. It's literally 28 to 36 times more potent than CO2 or carbon dioxide. Not 28%, but 28 times more potent. So that is pretty significant. So just some interesting statistics. So we're going to talk about my journey, and this is my wife, Christina, by the way. We're going to talk about our journey with our home here in just a few minutes. But we're focused on climate change. We're concerned about climate change. We just learned that our house is a pretty significant component to that. We have direct control over that. But a lot of us, and certainly myself, if I rewind my life 3 or 4 years, I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what mattered and what didn't matter. You know, if I compost, does that matter? If I change this light bulb, does that matter? I didn't have any sense of relativity in what mattered and what didn't matter. I didn't know where to spend my limited time. I didn't know how to prioritize my time. I didn't know what was free. I didn't know what rebates existed. I had a laundry list of questions. I probably filled a couple of pages in my notebook, right? So what we started to do about 4 to 5 years ago is to create our own, what we now call a home sustainability plan. It's really our roadmap. It's our guide that allows us to make decisions within our household and within our house to determine what does matter, where do we get the biggest bang for the buck, and where do we start. So let me take just a step back and focus on the journey that we've gone through over the last 8 years. So about 8 years ago, we've owned our house in Beverly, by the way, for 15 years. We started thinking about remodeling about 8 years ago. We knew that we would do remodeling in pieces. There's no way we could bite it all off at one time. So we started to plan our remodeling journey, if you want to call it that. And we realized, or we didn't realize, we understood that if we were remodeling, we wanted to do that remodel in a green way. We wanted to incorporate green into that remodel. We didn't want to be digging into walls now and patching everything up and making it beautiful and then coming back in 5 or 10 years and digging into things again, right? We want to do it right the first time. The other approach is certainly maybe you leave this room or you leave this event today and you may think, I want to make my house more green. There are some lifestyle things that I can do, but in this area I need to do some remodeling work or I need to do some construction work. And that's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter what the driver is. What matters is that you do it with green in mind and you plan it with green in mind and sustainability in mind. So again, what do we mean by green? So when we started 8 years ago to think about our home and to think about remodeling our home, and we wanted a more sustainable home, a greener home, several people asked us, well, what do you mean by green? Okay, so we had to think about it. And what we arrived at was what I'd mentioned before, those 5 resources. Every resource that comes into or goes out of our home, we consider that part of the sustainability of the home. So the fuel oil, or the fuel, we have oil, we'll talk about that more in a second. So the fuel, the heating fuel, the electricity, the water, the food and the food waste, and the product and product waste. That is what we consider to be in this kind of green bucket or this green category or sustainability category. So when we were starting to plan our remodel, we quickly realized that remodeling with green in mind or doing a green remodel is a challenge. I'm not a contractor, I'm not a general contractor, I'm not a contractor, I'm not an architect, but I grew up in a family of contractors. I've certainly swung the hammer many times in my life and helped to build many homes as I was growing up, so I'm pretty familiar with construction, pretty familiar with remodeling, done a number of major remodels myself and with brothers, but now that we were thinking about it with green in mind, it got like 10 times more complicated. That was just our experience. It just all of a sudden it got very complicated. And we ended up getting somewhat frustrated throughout the process. We can really boil those frustrations into 3 major categories. So let me just talk about those. So one is, and some of you heard me talk about this as you were walking in, our home was built in 1888, so it's 130, if I'm doing my math right, 130 years old, 131 years old. Is that right? Now I'm questioning myself. Somebody check my math. Fact check. So it's an old house, right? And I call it the AntiGreen House. Kind of jokingly, I call it the AntiGreen House. So we have a number of things within our house, like many of you. How many have homes that are 100 years old or older? Okay, yeah, we live on the North Shore, right? And we're in Marblehead. We have things like if you look under that window, we have things like back plaster in the stud base. We have knob and tube wiring in a good chunk of our house. So in the walls, in the ceilings, between the joists, in the attic, we have a tile roof. So when we start to talk to people about insulating and we start to talk to people about solar, those initial conversations were very painful. Now it's a very quick conversation because we know exactly what we have to do and how to do it. But those initial conversations were, oh, you have tile on your roof? Maybe solar isn't quite as straightforward as we thought it would be, right? So we have this AntiGreen home. Frustration number 2 was the homeowners. So they were very stubborn. We had very stubborn homeowners. And we looked in the mirror and we had to realize at some point that, yes, we were part of this problem. We were part of this challenge ourselves. And I don't think, and maybe I'll ask you when I get done with this statement, I don't think that we're unique in this area. We all love certain characteristics of our homes, right? Whether it's an older home, a newer home, there are certain things that we love about our home. And we have things that we love about our 130-year-old home as well. So I'll just mention 2 of the many. So we have single pane, double hung, bubble glass, multi-light windows. Thank you. We love those windows, right? And they're a big part of the character of the home. And this has definitely been the biggest debate that my wife and I have had about our home in the 15 years that we've owned it. I mean, that we've gone back and forth. Do we replace them? Do we refurbish them? Do we replace? We probably went back and forth on that for 8 years. And, it shifted from week to week, month to month. We finally drew a line in the sand about 4 years ago, and we said, we're refurbishing them. We're going to make them as tight as we can make them. We're going to put a low-profile storm on the outside to add a little bit more from an insulating value standpoint, because they are a part of our home, and we could not imagine throwing them out. Probably not the most green and the most sustainable, but we're keeping them. We also love the heat that comes out of a hot water cast iron radiator. We love the heat. And we also have hot water baseboard heat, doesn't compare. We also have heat pumps in part of our house, forced air heat, doesn't compare. We love the heat that comes out of the cast iron radiators. So we're not ripping them out, but what we have decided to do, we're compromising. What we've decided to do is continue to put heat pumps throughout our house and use that now as our primary source of heat, and use the hot water boiler, oil-fed boiler, as the backup source of heat, as the supplemental heat, as the heat that we can turn on when it drops below 30 degrees outside, as the heat that we can turn on if it's really damp and really chilly. So we're going to use that as our backup heat and supplemental heat at this point. So I think it's okay. Well, it is okay, and I've listened to other presentations about rehabbing old homes and making them more sustainable. It's okay if there are certain things in your home that you really love, and it's maybe not as green as it could be. Focus on other areas. Make them as tight and as green as you can, but focus on other areas. That's, in my opinion, that's the way that it's going to be with an older home. Okay, our third challenge, our third frustration. Sorry, I keep stepping in front of you.
No.
Our third frustration is we were looking, this is 7 years ago now, we were looking for somebody to guide us through this process. We were looking for, it didn't matter to us whether it was an architect or general contractor or consultant or somebody like that. We wanted somebody to guide us through this process. We talked to a number of architects, we talked to a number of general contractors, and they pretty much all have specialties in different areas. Whether it's, I'm talking about related to green and sustainability right now. So they have specialties in different areas, but none of them really looked at they didn't look at our home from a comprehensive view or overarching view. They didn't look at those 5 resources, the heating and cooling, electricity, the water, the food waste, and the product and product waste. So we were frustrated with that, right? We finally said, you know what, analysis paralysis here is going to kill us. We have to get started. We just have to dive in, and what we do wrong, we do wrong. What we do right, great. And we ended up doing the first part of our remodel. It took probably a year and a half to get through the remodel. We did, I think, a lot of things right, some of them by accident, which, sometimes that's the way it works. We certainly did some things wrong, and we had some lessons learned. But we got to the end of that process. We took a few months off just to breathe and forget about, selecting paint colors and all the things that come along with a remodel. And as we started to think about the next phase of our house, we realized that we needed to do something different. We needed to change the way that we were planning. So we came up with the idea of we need to create what we now call a home sustainability plan. So it has become a roadmap. It has become our guide. So as we go into the next phase of our remodel, we know what the different options are. We know what the cost benefit is on those different options. And it really helps us and really guides us into the next remodeling phase. So it includes 3 primary things. First and foremost, it takes an impartial view of all of the resources that come into and go out of our home. Those 5 things that I've been talking about. And it really looks at them in a side-by-side manner. It looks at them from a relative, comparable type of a view. So we can see, this is how much our oil is emitting and impacting climate. This is how much our water is impacting climate. This is how much our food waste, or this is how much our product waste is impacting climate. We can look at that in a side-by-side manner. Secondarily, I'm sure you're imagining this now, is personalized to our home. And it's not only personalized to our home, but it's also personalized to our lifestyle. So there are certain things that we do within our home, right? The comfort we keep, the food habits we have. As you live in your home, you have a lifestyle within your home. If we were to sell our home tomorrow, somebody else would move in, and they would potentially have a very different lifestyle than we do. So this plan is really personalized not only to our home, but how we live and our lifestyle within our home as well. The third thing is that the plan includes a financial foundation and a financial component. So as we look at different resources within our home, and this is, by the way, this is not our home, this is from a different sustainability plan. And it's just looking at one of their resources, which is oil. They also were heating with oil. And you can see, well, actually, it's kind of small. So on the left-hand axis, you see metric tons of CO2 emissions. So you can see their current state. You can see what they could reduce that to with some lifestyle changes. You can see what they would reduce that to with some medium investment, and you can see what they could reduce that to with some major investments. So by looking at the hogs within your home, applying a cost to reduce those or to mitigate those, you start to get a cost-benefit kind of an analysis. Now, this is just in one resource. As you look at the home across all 5 of those resources, you can really see where it makes the most sense to apply your time or apply your money to get the biggest benefit. Does that make sense? Okay. So, just to start to wrap up here. So, we've gone through this process on the first part of our home. We developed a home sustainability plan as a part of that process so that as we roll into the next phase of remodeling, it's a little bit easier and less stressful. For those of you that are do-it-yourselfers out there, please visit pathtoagreenhome.com. We've got a lot of good information out there. This is certainly something you can do yourself. I want to share as much of the research and the knowledge that I've gained over the last 6 to 7 years as I've gone through this with others. If you're not a do-it-yourselfer, this has become our flagship product now at Path to a Green Home. And with that, my final thought. So as individuals, we are one of 7.7 people on the planet, in the world. So we are a drop in the ocean, right, as individuals. And when I think about what I'm doing or what we're doing to our home, And when I think about it from an individual standpoint, it's kind of depressing, because like, what can I do that's really going to make a difference? What can I do? But what I'm passionate about is educating homeowners in communities like Marblehead, to really look at, and whether it's related to your home or whether it's outside of your home, but to look at how you can make a little bit of a difference as an individual, but as a collective, as a community, if you can put programs in place, if you can put initiatives in place in a community, if you can put a campaign in place in a community and get people behind that and get momentum behind that, that's where I get excited. That's where you can start to make a difference. That's where you can start to drive change, right? So my final statement is, let's go out and let's drive change. Thank you.